You've probably heard by now about the heartbreaking Supreme Court decision that failed to stop the expansion of abortion pills, which continue to endanger women. But experts say there was a significant religious freedom win hidden within the decision's language, and that's got the left really upset. We're going to tell you all about it. Welcome to Speak Up Virginia, equipping you to speak up on the life, family, and freedom issues that matter most to you. From the Family Foundation, I'm your host, Candi Cushman, with our president, Victoria Cobb. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you with us here with Speak Up Virginia. You know, Victoria, let's just launch right into this decision that I'm sure most of our audience has been hearing about for the last several days, and that is this decision from the Supreme Court. And I'm sure people are trying to process this. It really has dismayed pro-lifers everywhere. And I think it is significant because it's the High Court's first decision on abortion since Dobbs, since they overturned Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, I mean, it has been a top headline because it is such an important case. But I think the first thing people need to realize is what it did not do, because that's actually maybe the lead out of this, is that I think we need to start with the Supreme Court did not uphold a universal right to these chemical abortions distributed in this way without the safety standards that we want. So they didn't sort of say, oh, this is good, you're good to go. It's sort of a permanent decision. So I think that's the most important thing. What the court did do is actually issue a much narrower ruling, and it is kind of based on this legal bar that you have to hit called standing. And basically it said that the people that brought the case, the plaintiffs, just simply did not have enough injury, because you have to be wronged. And so the people did not bring enough injury to sufficiently be able to bring the merits before the court. And so before they ever got to these actual standards, they had to kind of say, this case isn't going to be heard this way by us.
Yeah. And just, I think that can be confusing, because if you're paying attention to the media, you've probably seen headlines like these that we're going to flash up on the screen here that do say exactly what you said it didn't, make it sound a lot more sweeping.
Yeah.
But just real quick, okay, so when you say injury, it's a group of doctors, medical professionals that brought the suit. It wasn't like a direct harm. Right?
Correct. If we had a woman who was in front of the Supreme Court as a plaintiff who had been harmed herself by the chemical abortion, that might have been different. But what we had are doctors, and it's a long story. We can get into kind of exactly why they didn't have standing. But the bottom line is what this means at the end of the day. I mean, what's the bare bottom line is that the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration, basically has carte blanche freedom to continue with these lax regulations until there's somebody that comes forward with what the court considers real injury.
Mm-hmm. So just to reiterate that, it means, correct me if I'm wrong, that right now, as it stands now, the federal government pretty much has unprecedented freedom because they've been doing all these expansions. Expansion of access to these abortion drugs, and they will continue without common sense safety regulations.
Yeah, it's incredibly disappointing, because I think a lot of people want to know how we're going to have a check on the FDA in general, let alone specifically on chemical abortions. I think a lot of people are saying, like, wait, if they can't bring a lawsuit against FDA, who can? And so there's concern there, and I think that's fair. But I think the bottom line is that you had people who were concerned. I mean, these were doctors that were concerned that if someone shows up in the ER as a result of a complication, they are going to have to be part of finishing the abortion.
And with good reason.
Right.
Because I'm looking at stats here that show 1 in 25 women do end up in the emergency room.
And that's their own labeling. So I think it's important for people to know those aren't even just generic statistics out there. Those are the FDA's own labeling basically says that.
1 in 25 women who take the abortion pill or choose this method to end their child's life.
And then we have to put an exclamation point on that, which is to say that you've got about 2/3 of abortions today are now being done by chemical abortions. So those numbers are really starting to add up.
Okay, let me just stop and clarify something really quick, because this might be a question people have, and that is, in the states where abortion is widely banned, maybe even completely banned, heavily restricted, this court ruling does not make their ban of chemical abortion pills moot, right? It's
no,
not
it did not change anything at the state level. It did
Okay.
not. No, all it simply said is, at this moment, we're not going to change anything. This sort of status quo, everything kind of freezes in place.
So
is the easiest way to think of it.
It's not like a Roe v. Wade ruling where it overturned all of the existing state
No,
regulations.
thank heavens.
Yeah.
We want a Roe v. Wade in the right, we want an overturn, not continuation of that. So we don't have federalism at its, we're still upholding the rights of states, and that's good.
But like you say, it is still concerning because widespread use of the pill, the abortion pill, and it's not really being regulated in any good way. So we'll get back to that. But we are going to address word about a religious freedom victory that may have come out of this, surprisingly enough. There was a silver lining. But before we do that, I did want to just let you give a little background on the case. We were kind of getting into that. Maybe tell us a bit, real quick, how it was brought forward.
Yeah, so the group of doctors is the Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, and it's them versus the FDA. So FDA versus Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine, and basically the court unanimously declined to stop the FDA's dangerous removal of these safety standards that on the abortion drugs. And so the case was filed by them, and they basically said the FDA violated the law on how they rushed the process. And I think we've talked about this before when the court case was being heard, but basically they put these drugs through an emergency process. Rather than the more lengthy, greater trials, they do trials for patients and so forth. They rushed this through, and so the dilemma is they're saying, look, these didn't fall into a category. We weren't trying to cure a disease, eradicate a pandemic. These are chemical abortion pills. They should have gone through the regular process, and they're jeopardizing women's health, and they're putting physicians in the unconscionable position of having to complete abortion processes in the emergency room, despite where they might stand on protecting human life. And I think you mentioned earlier the high rate of complications, and I think that's really what brings this thing forward. It's not simply we object to chemical abortions, although I think a lot of people would like to. The reality of this case was brought because of the safety issues.
Yeah, because when you fast track something like that, you're going to do it at the expense of some complications.
I think that's what we're finding, at least in this case, no question about it.
I think this whole thing just really demonstrates how since Dobbs, we've seen even more of a great shift in the battle on this issue, on the front lines of this battle, and it has shifted to this chemical abortion pill. And, I think you can see that with some of what they did to loosen up the regulations is allowing mail order pills or the expansion also of retail. So I've heard in my own community about CVS, deciding to make this available. And that's really where it's moved now. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's why, my biggest point is that we've moved the abortion debate. They always say between a woman and her doctor. This isn't between a woman and her doctor. Her doctor is barely involved. The reality is this is between the U.S. mail, a stranger, and a woman. And it literally makes the woman's home an abortion facility. It makes her the abortionist. This is a totally different thing than even when we're talking about surgical abortion.
And when you say that, when it puts the woman in place of being the abortionist, I don't think people understand, a lot of people, how traumatic that can be. Two of the biggest lies we hear out there today are, one, that there's a constitutional right to chemical abortion, which, as we have said, this case did not establish that. And two, that chemical abortions are safe. It's so important that we not forget the real life women. And of course, the babies that are losing their lives, we know and are fighting for those innocent babies, but real life women suffering from these complications. Now, we talked about before on this show about the tragic death of a 24-year-old mom. She died less than a week after being prescribed an abortion pill. We are going to put her picture, a headline about that on the screen here. I think we got to remember the real life people like her. And we need to hear the other side of this story of women's painful experience with this abortion pill. Let's just listen to some of their stories. This was a video put together by Alliance Defending Freedom.
This was so different and so far beyond normal bodily function. Nothing stopped the pain.
It just felt like I was going to be in this never-ending misery alone. I was a woman in labor who didn't know she was in labor, and I had no nurse, no midwife, no friend, no mom to hold my hand.
I was all alone and had to go through the entire experience by myself.
I was so scared and I was bleeding so heavily, I thought I was going to die.
It was like birthing a baby. I've had 6 children, and it was like birthing a child. And I felt my baby come out.
They did not tell me that I would hold my dead baby, that I would see its eyes and its fingers. I still see it.
Okay, real quick, tell us how the FDA relaxed these guidelines over the last few years that puts people in danger.
Well, the first thing they did is they allowed the abortion pill to be used past 7 weeks. I mean, that was what it was really approved for. So the first thing is it's going longer. The second thing is that they eliminated the need for an in-person doctor visit, right? So that, I think we should all be deeply concerned when we sort of remove the medical professional and the face-to-face care that everybody deserves, honestly, that women deserve even when they are going forward with a chemical abortion. And then the third thing is that they basically said, we're not going to track any complications unless they're fatal. So the only one we know about is this woman who died, but we don't know what's happening with all the women that are showing up in the ER as a result of the chemical abortion. If you're not tracking, you can't even get to what's the real harm here.
Okay, all that is so disturbing because even in the states that don't allow unlimited chemical abortion, we're getting this attempt to pass what's called shield laws in other states. So we have Democrats pushing shield laws. And here in Virginia, they tried that. Tell us about that. What's happening with that?
Yeah, well, shield law is basically this idea that we're going to protect abortionists, even if they participate, or pharmacists that participate in abortion in other states. We're going to do things that keep this sort of bubble of protection, legal protection around these doctors. So if they want to participate, for example, in sending a chemical abortion into a state where it's illegal, we're going to protect them here in Virginia. We're not going to let their governor come after them for violating the law in Texas. We're not going to take their medical license here in Virginia. And so it's a really horrific idea. And I think we just all have to remember, anytime we're trying to do medicine in secret, we have real concerns around. Think about what's happening here with nobody interacting with this woman almost at all. And she's going through something as serious as an abortion. I get worried about the young girls that are caught in sex trafficking and other things where these are the places where we are able to help them, when they have to move forward with medical care. Why do we think we see all those signs when you go into a doctor's office or a like public safety places? Hey, call this number if there's a problem. It's because this is the one place she has to go when she has a medical emergency. She has to be there.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Our medical professionals are even trained to look for abuse. And so we're pulling that out of the process of pregnancy.
It is so disturbing, and that's why there was a lot at stake in this case. So that's why we're all really disappointed that the Supreme Court basically left in place no accountability for the FDA. However, there was this little silver lining that people are talking about. Tell us about that.
Yeah, a really good thing actually happened in this court case. And it kind of actually has the liberals pretty upset, which is kind of nice. There's a Slate article that we'll put up on the screen from the magazine Slate. And it says, basically, the headline is, Brett Kavanaugh slipped a poison pill in his Mifepristone opinion. And
I mean, when the leftists are upset about it, there's something good going on if they're complaining about the ruling.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. So what happened is, just to explain this, what they're calling a poison pill, the government did to themselves, which I think is fantastic. So basically, when the court was looking at this issue of, do the doctors have a right to bring this case before us? That the only way they'd have that right is if they are truly forced to do an abortion against their conscience. And so that's what was sort of actually at issue before you even get to the merits of the case. And so basically, the government kind of changed its tune. We've not exactly had a friendly administration towards protecting people's religious freedoms and their conscience rights. And what happened is the government stood there and argued, no, don't worry, we have conscience protection laws and they don't have to do these abortions. And so by Kavanaugh basically holding them to what they said and putting that in the opinion, they're pretty upset about it, because that's now an opinion. It's a 9-0 opinion.
So they're trying, in order to really drive home this argument that there was no injury to the doctors, they're trying to preempt this religious freedom harm, and it's all covered, right, basically?
Yeah, and I think if they had just done that in court and the Supreme Court had not picked up on it and put it in the opinion,
right,
they could keep wobbling on all sides of this. But I think the fact that it went into this Supreme Court opinion, guess what? That's going to be referenced by all sorts of precedential things in the future. So I think it's fantastic that at least out of this disappointing decision, we got something really valuable.
I mean, There's so much irony in this. I mean, first of all, I just have to go back to that headline talking about a poison pill. I don't know if it just doesn't even enter their mind.
That we're talking about pills?
Yeah, that we're talking about chemical abortion pills
Which
that
are
kill
poison.
babies. Yeah. Are they just that blind to their own irony? I'm not really sure.
Or they think so little of human life that it
Yeah.
doesn't bother them that it's a poison pill. Like, it doesn't even, I mean, I would never imagine making that joke.
Like
if you're
that,
trying
yeah.
to sell this thing as aspirin, but then you're putting it up. Anyway, I'm moving on.
Yeah. But then, it's just like it's a horrible thing that Kavanaugh has done this. But to your point, he didn't just leave it in the argument. He made a point of citing it
Yeah.
in the case. Let's look what he says here. Okay, he cited it in the majority opinion. He says, quote, he says that it, quote, fully protects doctors against being required to provide abortions or other medical treatment against their consciences. He's referring to the federal law fully protecting doctors against being required. So that's broader than what we've seen before, and now it's in the text of a Supreme Court decision.
I mean, they tried to play it both ways. They got caught. That's what happened in there. And I think it's fantastic that at least we don't have, we have a situation where now somebody can reference that when they're being forced to do something against their conscience, and we can go into court and say, look, this is gospel creed.
Okay.
People like to look at Supreme
Yeah.
Court decisions that way.
How broad do you think this is? Because just the other day on this podcast, we were talking about the Biden administration's attempt to force doctors to do these gender transition surgeries, or if they didn't, their medical organization could lose funding. So could this maybe be argued now to cover that area?
I would love to believe that. I mean, the conscience protections they're referencing, the law that they're pointing to say we should have these freedoms, and that the government said, oh, yeah, that definitely trumps the other law, is really specific to abortion and those kind of procedures. So I don't know that we can go that far, but the principle's there. So I would pick up on it if I were an attorney and I were arguing a case like that. I'd sure say, look, we honor this in this area. Why wouldn't we honor this in another area?
All right. Well, let's just talk about, in general, where this whole thing leaves us. Because I think a lot of people, when they hear that the doctors even didn't have legal standing, it brings up the question, do any Americans have the ability at this point to challenge the FDA?
I think that is a huge concern. And it continues to be. We don't want people to be completely harmed in order to have to come to the court, right? This woman who died from the chemical abortion, she can't really be a plaintiff. And I say that really, that's a really hard thing to say. She's dead.
Okay, but her family maybe.
I guess. But the point is, are we going? You're going to have people who are harmed. They can come forward, but we shouldn't have to have harm before when we know these are lax standards. We shouldn't have to have.
It's too late.
It's too late
to wait for all of them to be harmed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now,
okay.
I'm sure that will happen, and I think it's the same way we find detransitioners are coming forward and saying, look, the surgery that you did to me when I was 15, too young to know it. That's why we have cases like that. And I think we will have cases on this chemical abortion, but people don't want to talk about their abortion. The whole reason they're getting a chemical abortion
Correct.
is usually in secret. And so for those women to come forward and say, not only did I do something I tried to do in secret and it failed, but I was harmed, and now I'm going to be the central figure in a U.S. Supreme Court case, that's not an easy road to follow. And so I just don't know how many people are going to want to do that.
All right. Well, Kamala Harris she did not think this was cause for celebration. Let's just hear her take on it.
This is not a cause for celebration because the reality is certain things are still not going to change. We are looking at the fact that 2/3 of women of reproductive age in America live in a state with a Trump abortion ban. This ruling is not going to change that. This ruling is not going to change the fact that Trump's allies have a plan that if all else fails, to eliminate medication abortion through executive action. So we must remain clear-eyed about the threats to reproductive freedom in America, and we must remain vigilant.
Obviously, they're wasting no time politicizing this, thinking about the campaign coming up or that we're already heading into.
I don't think there's any question. Her using the word Trump every time. I mean, she's not just responding to the Supreme Court case. She's using the word Trump. You know, it's Trump's abortion ban. Well, Trump isn't in the states. He's not the governor. He's not the guy making the abortion ban. And actually, you know, he doesn't always say the same thing that Governor, like, let's say, Ron DeSantis says. So I think it's funny that I mean, I guess we're going to tag all things conservative to Trump until November so that they make sure. I mean, so what a joke. I mean, I hope most people can read through that because, I mean, that's absurd.
That's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing to realize here is they're not celebrating this as a big sweeping victory.
I mean, I think that's the good part is they didn't get what they wanted either. They wanted a universal right to these chemical abortions distributed in a very unsafe manner, and they wanted the Supreme Court to hand that to them in this case, and they did not get that. So I think that is a good thing.
Okay, so where does that leave us? Help us understand the path forward here.
Well, I think it still leaves every state to keep working on their life laws, including chemical abortion, right? So unfortunately, we haven't gotten where we want to go, but we were able to stop the shield laws. So we're going to have to come back. They're going to be back at that year after year until this gets fixed. And so the bottom line is we have to absolutely tell folks that our state is not going to protect people who practice illegal medicine elsewhere. We also need to start looking at these complications and these harms to women. And I would love to see us, at a minimum, even in a state where we do not have a pro-life majority, to me, the place we should come together is on data and reporting. And the fact that, because a state can require more reporting than the federal government, right? So the reporting doesn't have to come by way of the FDA. It can be that a state says, we're going to track the complications so that we know at the state level what this is doing. That should be a place, left, right, Democrat, Republican, everybody should be able to say, data is data, let's find out what, but they're afraid to find out. And so we're going to have to push on that.
Well, let me just encourage everyone. You have the power in your local community. Encourage the women around you to speak up. You can volunteer at pregnancy resource centers. We can be coming alongside those women. I think that is going to be essential with where we're at right now. And also just coming alongside the women in your life and helping them to be able to speak about their stories. I think the stories here are going to be key to people waking up to this issue, and also key to it not just shifting into taking a pill in your home. People need to understand what the reality of this looks like. So thank you for joining us again. Remember, we are stronger when we speak together, and we'll see you next time.